Assalamu alaikum everyone, brother Dawah here. Hope you guys are doing well. So in today's video, I'm going to be looking into Cosmic Skeptic's video on homosexuality and why it is amoral. He's generally a really smart guy. He makes good points. He's very famous and he has done many debates. One of the famous debate with Muhammad Hijab. Many of us Muslims have watched that debate very fondly, very enjoyable. Okay, so I'm gonna be looking into this video. Homosexuality is not moral, and here's why. In this video, he tries to argue why homosexuality is actually amoral because it doesn't fall under what he calls the moral sphere. But I have a few problems with it. Most of the videos I don't have a problem with, but this one kind of makes an issue, and I'll be addressing it.
Homosexuality moral? The answer? No. Wait, let me clarify that. When I say no, that homosexuality is not moral, I don't at all mean to say that it's immoral. Rather, what I want to imply is that the question as a whole is erroneous. As soon as this so-called debate is brought up, as soon as somebody poses the question about homosexuality in this manner of morality, they've already committed a grave fallacy. The mistake being made here is an ungrounded assumption that homosexuality as a topic, or an act, or an orientation, falls within what I call the moral sphere.
Okay, so here he's basically saying the thing that he calls the moral sphere. If a person is born homosexual and has no choice on his orientation, then it does not fall within this sphere, hence cannot be judged based on that. There is still a huge debate about it. He further addresses it, but he kinds of doesn't represent it completely. I'll try to do that in this video. And if it does fall within the moral sphere, then it can be judged even by secularist or atheist.
It either falls within the moral sphere or it falls within the amoral sphere, that is, not in the moral sphere. My goal here is to describe the difference between these two spheres and explain which one is home to homosexuality. My aim is to show you that no, homosexuality is not inherently moral, but it isn't immoral either. It's got absolutely nothing to do with morality, and you therefore have no right to morally judge people for it. In other words, I want to show you why even considering whether someone is being moral or not by simply being a homosexual is a ridiculous idea.
Okay, so far so good. It all follows that if it does not fall within the moral sphere, then it is amoral, and it should not even be judged because it doesn't even fall under the criteria of morality. Just like is blinking your eye moral? Like you blink necessarily, and it doesn't affect someone's well-being, so it is not. And it cannot be even judged by morality. But I want to say this, even the idea of the moral sphere is not necessarily true. Why is that the case? Because someone can just change it, the criteria, and maybe can change it from well-being to not being well. It's just subjective.
Simple criteria by which you can judge whether or not an action falls within this moral sphere and can be judged in a moral context. If something doesn't fall within this category, then we can't view it in terms of morality and we can't judge people for it. Now, there are two boxes that must be checked in order to say that something does fall within the moral sphere. The first of these is that there must be a conscious agent committing the action, and the second is that the action must have some effect on human well-being. Now, as a quick aside, as I'll need to mention this briefly, I've said before that I disagree with Sam Harris about morality. I don't believe that morality is objective or can be objective, because to believe this is to assume that well-being is intrinsically a good thing. However, this doesn't matter in this instance, because there is something that we can all agree on here, that our sense of morality is based upon well-being. The only difference is that I think this is a subjective assumption we make because of our evolutionary tendencies, whereas Dr. Harris thinks that morality is by definition based on well-being.
Okay, so you see, here I agree with him almost completely. Yes, under naturalism, there is no objective morality and all morality is subjective. I have no problem with that. But the thing that I do have the problem is the fact that, first of all, even the sphere is subjective, and the fact that if something does not affect someone or someone's well-being directly, it can still affect the society that we might not see the effect of immediately but further in the future.
In order to help us with this, I've drawn a very high quality table which has 4 sections. I don't know how well you can see this, but I've split it between conscious acts, unconscious acts, things that affect well-being, and things that don't affect well-being. As you can see, an action has to be both conscious and affect well-being to fall within the moral sphere, and I'll explain why. And I'm sorry that I have to spell this out, but there is a reason for it, so just bear with me. If an action does not affect well-being, then as we've already determined that morality is based upon well-being, it doesn't fall within the moral sphere and can't be judged accordingly. For example, if I decide to lift my hand, that's a conscious act, but it doesn't have any effect on well-being and therefore doesn't fall within the moral sphere. You can't judge me for doing it. Likewise, if I were to roll over in my sleep, that's an unconscious act, but it also doesn't have any effect on well-being, and so I definitely can't be morally judged.
Okay, cool chart. We don't have a problem with the chart itself. We can just move on from here. I'm gonna skip a little bit. So let's go ahead.
So now we can consider acts that do affect well-being. So take the following example. If I were to sleepwalk one night and knock over a glass of water in the kitchen before returning to bed and do so completely unconsciously, and the next day somebody slipped on the water and died, I've committed an act that affects well-being. However, I wouldn't be held morally accountable because I didn't consciously do it. And you can see that that means it doesn't fall within the moral sphere. On the other hand, if I intentionally trip someone up, causing them injury, then I've done something that definitely affects well-being, and I've done so consciously. That means it falls within the moral sphere. Ding, 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 I can be held morally accountable.
See, here is where the problem and the big problem comes. By his standard, for example, if something affects the society or even kills off the society in 50, 60 years but didn't affect the society in any way at that moment, is it morally acceptable? And is incest hence morally acceptable? Because, well, it doesn't affect the well-being of people at the moment, or incest with contraception. You see how it gets messed up.
To be conscious, not by chance, not by accident, and must affect well-being, be it a positive or a negative effect, to be considered either moral or immoral. If these conditions are not met, the action is amoral and no rational person can judge a person for committing it. To do so is to fly in the face of rationality. It would be like holding a volcano morally accountable for erupting.
And here is the second problem. Well, can something not affect someone's well-being but still be considered immoral, such as disobeying your parents or something similar to that? Most society does consider it immoral, but by the standard it's not.
We can apply all of this to homosexuality. Firstly, does homosexuality affect well-being? Well, of course, we can talk all day about the benefits and detriments of gay parentage or the inclusion of homosexuality in sexual education, but these are separate issues from simply being a homosexual, and gay marriage for that matter too. Both of these things do not affect anybody else and therefore do not fall within the moral sphere.
Okay, so for the most of the part, I have no issue with what he's saying, that if it is an unconscious act, or if homosexuality is an unconscious act, or if someone is homosexual, it is not his choice, then it does fall under the amoral sphere. But if someone is even homosexual but acts upon it, the fact that he acts is his choice, and it does affect the societal well-being, such as the high HIV rate on male-to-male homosexual activity, and so on and so forth. Some people can consider that immoral, some people don't. It's just subjective.
Moral sphere. So in theory, we could conclude here. But for the benefit of those still unconvinced, let's check homosexuality against our other moral criteria. So, secondly, is homosexuality a conscious choice? Now, there is a debate about this. It's a fatuous debate, however, and we can largely dismiss it. The problem with the debate is that it's usually framed in the following way. Either homosexuality is natural and determined by birth, or it's instilled in a person by their environment and upbringing. But think about it for a moment and you'll realize that even if being gay is determined by upbringing and environmental factors, it's still not a choice. Did you choose your music taste? Here's a trait that certainly doesn't come from your genes, but rather from your environment and your upbringing. Still, it's not a choice.
Well, you see, he's kind of making a big mistake here. And why is that the case? Is because the fact that the debate is still valid. Because if someone is born homosexual, then he doesn't have a choice to stay homosexual or leave it. If someone is affected by the society and becomes homosexual, then he can leave it. Think about it like being addicted to something. You became addicted to something because you were brought up that way, but you still have a choice to stay and do it or just leave it. So the debate is still very valid and his point isn't very accurate. But the main problem I have is with the chart itself. I know Cosmic Skeptic is a lot smarter than this, but his viewers are going to take it seriously, and his viewers need to understand that if something falls under the moral sphere, it can still be immoral, like incest, because by his criteria that he's put up in this video, incest can be considered a moral and justifiable act. That's enough for me. Thanks for watching, guys. Ma salama.